Watershed District, Long Lake. This park, Nelson Park, there's a boat launch right here. There's some wake buoys out here to keep it under 5 miles per hour. You can see there's some large water lilies out here doing okay, which tells us that there's the energy here is not real high, otherwise we wouldn't see that kind of thing happen. This whole area was scouring back. It had once been out about here, and now it's back about 40 feet from where it once was. And they wanted to stabilize it, and it was Minear Creek Watershed District kind of pioneered or led the effort along with the city of Long Lake and a lot of the volunteer organizations like the Elks and the other groups, social groups. And so this was planted up and essentially reestablished this zone right here, and we used primarily logs as just strap them down. We knew they'd rot out, but we figured we're buying ourselves some time. If we bought the coconut rolls, that stuff takes it would be about 10 times the cost, maybe 20 times the cost. So this was a cheaper way to do it. So we had them strapped down, and that's what those guys with Elks and that, they wanted to hammer on something. They wanted to do some like real work. So they did this, and some of the master gardeners primarily planted it out. And so it was herbicided, and there was butcher paper put down, and then mulch and were planted into it at about 1 to 2, one every 1 or 2 square feet. So that's kind of the process of it happening. Now this is a low energy environment. We don't have high waves here. There just isn't. So these herbaceous perennials like cup plant right here, the hard stem bulrush, the soft stem bulrush, the burr reeds, are able to mechanically hold that thing in place because we don't have really high energy. And the water lilies have really started to do better out here. There's one of the buoys I was talking about. So then Trillium Bay is part of Lake Minnetonka. It's on the west side. And so this was a bay of Lake Minnetonka that was cut off. And Rob and I worked on this a long time ago, Bob Bean, engineer at Westwood. And the person who led this charge was Dean Johnson, the TV show guy. And so he decided, let's do this thing and let's make it into an episode. It turned into 3 episodes. So the process was stabilize it, get the carp out. That's typically something, the wetlands that I showed you, try to get the carp out of those every 4 or 5 years, otherwise they start to really tear things apart. So there is maintenance. I'll get to that in a little bit. So here's kind of what it looked like beforehand. And this is what it looked like as it was in the process. So this was maybe year 1, 2, somewhere like that. And this had been primarily reed canary grass and prairie or smooth brome. So this was all herbicided out, several applications. And I'm of the opinion that it's kind of like measure twice, cut once. The best time to do weed control is before anything else gets planted in there. So it's like, if it takes 3 applications, great. If it takes 5, it takes 5. There are projects we've done where there was no planting done that first year. That whole first season was devoted to weed control. And it tends to have worked out better, in my opinion. So, anyways, this is it. A great blue lobelias right there, flower. This is the lake. This is Lake Minnetonka out here. This is basically a carp barrier to stop the carp from getting in, and it doesn't keep them out completely, but it slows the process down. So you don't get a huge amount of them surging in. But basically, trout are those they call them Midwestern trout out the East Coast. But carp, basically, if there's water running, they move up it. So they go as far as they can. So that was that boardwalk that you saw earlier. This is Silver Lake. So this is down in Rochester. And this is part of Zumbro River, and it's dammed one end of it. So this whole thing is this big, it's called a lake, Silver Lake. It's not really a lake, it's basically a fat point in the Zumbo River. And the reason that it's dammed like that is that there's the power plant over here, and they're having to discharge the water. And so in the wintertime, during the week, they wouldn't be typically wouldn't be frozen, the lake. But then during the weekend, it'll start to freeze up, less use of electricity, etc. And people feeding them, the winter population of Canadian geese on this lake was about 25,000. And the fecal coliform counts were unimaginable, let's put it that way. There were numbers that kind of staggered me. And so there was a grant from PCA and City of Rochester Parks and Recreation and a couple of other partners to decide to basically bring the water quality in this up so that it wasn't so impaired for fecal coliform. So we worked with Wenk on this project, and Matheson. And this is a kind of about 2 years in, maybe 3 years in. So a lot of cut plants, and we looked at the nearby SNAs, and it's kind of like we sort of use that as a guide. We didn't copy it slavishly. We used it as a guide for what we wanted to achieve in terms of that shoreline of that lake. Again, this is a very low energy environment. So it's possible to put a lot of herbaceous perennials in there and have them work out well. So we've got sedge here, we've got coreopsis, we have clover, bush clover, cup plant back there. This thing is about 1.5 miles long, go around the whole thing, and it's a bunch of acres. I can't remember how many it is, but it's fairly significant. And when it first went in, oh my God, it was as if I'd asked them to give up an arm or a leg or something like that. There was so much bad press about this, and people were just, it was like the end of the world, the Western world as we know it, if this was done. Go ahead.
Can you say more about that? Like, what were people paranoid about when this first went in?
That it would devalue their properties, and because people would look at it and say, their mowers broke down, they don't care about the place. Some people actually said that it's a sign of communism taking over. This is what they told me. I just nodded and said, okay. And we would show them examples of other projects that had been done as examples of, it wasn't going to be something we were ashamed of. And so we have very heavy on the flowers. We had a lot of grasses in there because we need the structure, so it's about 50-50, maybe 60 on the forbs, so that's higher than usual in terms of the mix. But we felt that we had one shot to kind of get people turned around on this, so we loaded it up with flowers. And I was down there this past summer, and I was taking a bunch of folks from Sweden around who were with Stockholm Park and Rec and Malmo Park and Rec, and showing it to them. And there was just tons of people out there, not only on the sidewalk outside of it, but also walking through it. And the geese population has really plummeted because the geese, I don't know how a geese thinks, but for whatever reason, they don't want to take their hatchlings into tall vegetation. They don't do it, they avoid it. And so their populations have come way down. They're under about 3,000 most of the time. So that water body can handle it. It's not ideal, we'd like it down to maybe 500, but it's not there yet.
Is that mostly seed or plugs?
Down at the water's edge, it's plugs, and up here, it's seed. So then I'll talk about this in a little bit. So this is, what I want to talk about is maintenance, like installation and maintenance. So the Minnehaha Creek headwaters, we worked on that project. It first started in like 2003, and it was planted out, and then they decided to add a bridge over Grays Bay, and they just had a contractor come in and kind of rip things up, and they didn't put it back together. So the watershed district said we want it to be back the way it was, because it's where the whole thing starts. It's the reason for us being. So there was a bunch of seeding and plugging that happened in and around where the bridge went in. This is a footpath, and a lot of people fish, so we want to have access. This is path rush primarily in through here. Jump is tenuous. And we have listed out the seeding and planting, what happened in 05 after the bridge was done, and then the maintenance period for the 2 years previous, and what we were going to do for the year ahead. And I would present this to the board as, I call it the state of the wetlands for the year. And so I take it through all these different projects and the maintenance that was going to go into them. So management activities and issues, control burns. So Natalie from our office did the sampling on all of these things. Here's our invasive species, not very high numbers, but they're there. Persistent problem species, so these are the ones we're having a hard time kind of keeping ahead of. A lot of times that would be smooth grown. So other places would be reed canary grass, but kind of those are the tough guys to get rid of. So here it is, here, after the Sturby Bridge construction, here's the list of things that were done. Here's the status where we give cover, invasive species, and that doesn't add up to 100%. So let's say it's 95 and 5, okay? There's the wildlife sighting, so she's really good at bird calls, so she can identify them very well. So she would pick this information up as she would go along. So all areas, here's the things. Control burn was used in the upland areas. So the split rail deal here, when we do a project, we try to get some kind of a fence around it like this, because it says, like Joan Nassar would say, it looks like an intentional landscape. Like somebody planned for it to be like that. It wasn't just, like it said, mower broke and moved away, kind of deal. So there's interpretive signs, there's a big blue in the foreground, some coreopsis, bee balm, and a mixture of prairie sedges here and grasses, blazing star. So anyway, I'll finish up with this one. And the reason that we did this was we wanted to keep on emphasizing the point that it's not a no maintenance environment. Anything done in an urban environment, it can be low maintenance, but it can't be no maintenance. Now, when they were mowing this area over here before, mowing with no irrigation and no fertilizing, 20 passes a year, that's typically the number of mows in a season. That costs anywhere from $800 to $1,000 an acre, kind of like the minimum. And this was running at about $200 an acre. Now, if it's irrigated and fertilized, it's going to be close to $2,000 an acre. So, again, it's not no maintenance, but it's a lot lower maintenance than grass. Now, it's harder to get people that know how to do this stuff. It takes more like a gardening mindset rather than a guy sitting on a lawnmower just driving with the brain shut off. But it's low maintenance. That's the idea. And what ended up happening was that the last few years, because we wanted to transfer this all over the watershed district so their staff would do it, is we packaged all of these up into all of these projects as one single project, and we let it out to bid for maintenance. And it was a 5-year contract, but it was renewable annually. So first year they get it, they did well, they could keep it for the next year, etc. And we found that to be a really good way to get good contractors and good maintenance. Because this was something they could really bite into. It wasn't one site here, it was a whole bunch of sites. So they could kind of get scales, orders of scale in terms of. This is the last thing I just want to mention. So the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is rewriting the stormwater manual. So we've been working on we're just about done with the bioinfiltration green. There's some trees with the parts we were writing about. So some of the stuff that's in there is worth looking into, because what I've shown you primarily is like end of pipe solution. It's kind of like the last, the thing has already happened where, the stream has already fallen apart. And the goal here is to keep more of it up in the watershed before it gets in a pipe, the 1.1 inch, 24-hour thing, as much as possible, so that those downstream deals don't have to be so really tough and they're not as expensive. So That's Calhoun. So I'll take any questions. Marcy Bean's not here. She can tell me. Go ahead, Rob.
Your site in Rochester, if that was, I would imagine the shoreline, it looked like before you planted it was pretty barren
Yeah.
and probably had a lot of goose poop and high nutrients.
Yes.
Did that give you problems with weeds and invasives after it was planted?
Not as much as we would have thought. I should credit Prairie Restoration who did that project. It's really clean. I mean, they did a very nice job on it. They also, one of the things that they had the idea of was they took this concrete and it's like think of a roof, a galvanized roof with the ridges on it. Oh, this was like divots in it. And then somebody had the idea, let's pour concrete in it. So that's what they used along large parts of this. So they had said, we should take that out. And I thought, we take that out, there's no budget to do anything else. So we had the contractor bust holes in it and plant into it. And it's worked okay. I think what I would have done, if I did it now, I would make much bigger holes and fewer of them, rather than smaller lots of them. And so that was in the emergent zone. And the nutrients and there's a lot of nitrogen floating around there, a lot of phosphorus. So it's just plant the living daylights out of it. We have a lot of large water lilies in the wetland loofah, or leafia rather. No, there's a lot of loofah. And some of those, I mean, if 0 is a buckthorn and 10 is a lady slipper, most of our plants in all these projects are, in terms of coefficiency of conservancy, are like 1s, 2s, 3s. And then now, when some of them have like 10 years under the belt, 15 years under the belt, now it's okay to go in there and add some more conservatives to push it up to 4, 5, 6, and make it, because the things become more stable. But when we work on it, when we first start working on it, it's kind of like the patients just come out of ER, and they're all cut up. It's just, the main thing here is to keep them alive. And that's what the heavy duty emphasis on weed control is about. We can't let the weeds get ahead of it because the cost of bringing them back is really, really high. Sorry, I just tore off. Any other questions?
In your experience with the native plantings, are there certain species that are really, really good at establishing the ones that you put in immediately for the recovering patient, like
Yep.
bulrushes?
And that's why I showed you the Minnesota Seed Manual, because you will find those in there. We put that document together the same way. It's like, what are the ones that are going to hold this thing together until we get it to be more stable, so we can have more conservative species go in, and you will find them in there. They're listed in terms of whether it's the bottom of the, if it's the bottom of the ditch, those are the fact wet type plants. Maybe there's a few obligates in there, and then if it's up the bank facing south, there's a different grouping species. Does that help?
What's your favorites? Are those?
My favorites, I love river vein. I love swamp milkweed. I love hard-stem bulrush, south-stem bulrush, river bulrush, three-square, common three-square, alyssna, white water lily. Actually, my favorite's newfar, the yellow one. Some people dismiss it, but it's really tough. So that works really good. The yellow water lily. There's some others. Switchgrass, prairie cordgrass as you move up out of the water. Arrow, broadleaf arrowhead, sorry to say that earlier. That's down at the water's edge. And always like to, they don't last long, but we always like to load it up with brown-eyed Susans, black-eyed Susans, and also great blue lobelia, cardinal flower, because it's under so much scrutiny those first few years, but if it looks really good, people are kind of surprised. They're like, God, I'm kind of surprised this thing looks better than I thought it would look. And it really eases the pressure on the agency that has taken this risk on doing this thing. So, oh, I forgot. My all-time favorite in terms of toughness, for just out of the water's edge, is kelp plant. The thing is fantastic. If you go down to Minnehaha Creek, right beside, immediately west of Nokomis, there was this, we put this channel in there. It was basically, we took the straightened part out, we left it as an old treatment, and we put the meander back in there. And the kelp plant is incredible. It's like heroic. It's just, it's so tough. And there's nothing it won't keep down. So that's one of my all-time favorites.
Do you work with any organizations like the DNR or MPCA to see if after your installations, the levels of chloroform and phosphorus nitrogen or reduced to this?
That's an excellent question, and that is something that is going to be part of the legacy funding, is to start to come up with meaningful data points in terms of, okay, this is what we thought it was going to do, and this is what we had beforehand. So what did it do? And we haven't had that, but that's what's coming. So it's not there yet. We have good data in terms of population dynamics, that kind of stuff, but not the water quality. I do know one thing about the chain of lakes. So the treatment wetlands that went in for Nokomis, Cedar Lake, and Calhoun, the clarity level, and clarity is a proxy for quality, in the middle of the summer, like July, on the Secchi discs in Nokomis was around 3 to 6 inches in terms of clarity. Before the disc dropped out, you couldn't see it anymore. In Cedar Lake, which is a deep lake, it's like 80 feet deep, it was down to about a foot before you couldn't see the disc anymore. And Lake of the Isles, forget it. You put the thing in there, you couldn't see it anymore. And so what we have seen is that the clarity levels in those lakes, typically now in the middle of the summer, are between 3 and 5 feet. That's a big difference. For me, that's a big difference. And it created another problem. The problem that it created on the back end was that Eurasian watermelon foil started, all this light was coming through and it started to grow up, so they've had to clear that material out. Hopefully we'll get some kind of a weevil or some beetle that kind of eats that guy and knocks it back.
So when you're talking about the long-term maintenance of those areas that are low maintenance and contracting it out, is there kind of an obligatory maintenance procedures every year? Like it should be mowed once, or
Yeah, that's a
or
good
does
question.
the contractor kind of monitor it and decide what?
And when we wrote those specs for the last set, we wanted to make it responsive to what the contractor was seeing in the field. So we did say, here are some things we think need to be done every year: mowing once a year, or burning. Burning was preferable out of every 3 years, they should burn it at least once out of those 3 years to knock stuff back, especially the woodies. Spot spraying of invasives. So if they start to see reed canary grass coming in, get out there, spray it. Get out there, spray it. Get out there, spray it until it's not there anymore. And then we would do the sampling at the end of the year and say, here's what's going on. Anyone else? All right. Well, thanks for coming out on a snowy day. Sorry I didn't have more CEUs for you. Thanks.